Hey, everybody, this is Nathan Art with Ministry Solutions and Executive Leadership Solutions. Thank you so much for being with us today. I am very excited about this conversation. I get to have a conversation with my friend, Justin Knapp, who started a company called SpaceTogether. So, Justin, thank you so much for being here, man.
Absolutely, man. Would take any excuse to hang out with you for an hour and talk about what we do. So excited for the
Same.
opportunity. Yeah,
Same.
man.
And what's really interesting is you guys will hear in this interview is that Justin and I share a lot of the same passions and same ideals. We happen to go about it very differently. And so when I was introduced to Justin and his concept, what man, like a year ago, would you say?
Man, I don't know. It's tough to say because I think we met the first time at Exponential, but it was like two
Yeah,
ships just passing. Like, oh, that's what you guys do. Oh, that's cool. And
yeah,
then I think it was probably about maybe a year, maybe 2 years ago, we connected and started hanging out a lot more. But yeah, somewhere
yeah.
around there.
Well, man, just to get everybody introduced to you and understand space together, man, I'd love for you just to share a little bit of your story, planning a church, starting a church, and how that's come to create what we now know as Space Together.
Absolutely, man. So my wife and I pastored a church for 14 years. The first 6 years of that, I was renting space from my mentor. So as soon as I got to Bible college, I met this guy who was a church planter and a Marine. He had successfully planted three churches, and he was in his mid 60s. And he said that he was going to do one more church, and it was really just to pour out everything that he had learned and all of his time of planting churches and everything else that he had done. And so I met him, started doing the whole follow him around and tell him that I feel called to serve him bit that many people can probably relate to. And when he finally actually sat down and started talking with me, he was like, dude, I see the church planner entrepreneur thing all over you. So I'm going to do this way differently. I'm never going to pay you. I'm never going to promote you, but I'm going to give you a piece of my building to start your own thing and I'll coach you along the way. And so for the first 6 years, we did that. It was absolutely awesome. We grew this tremendous church. It was so much fun. Lots of young people, a bunch of crazy people. And then I went through business school. I think it was in 2015. And when I got done with school, he took me out to breakfast one morning at like 5 in the morning. I don't know why old people love to meet at 5 a.m., but he was definitely one of those guys. So super early, we're having coffee, having breakfast, and he starts laughing, which was never a good thing when he did. And he was just like, "You have 3 months to get out of my building." And, we had a ton of people coming and a lot of energy and a lot of really cool things going on. But we didn't have a ton of cash. Like I had a bunch of people that would have given me their couch or would have like taken their shirt off and given it to me, but we just didn't have a ton of capital. And we were in Colorado Springs, which was like the hottest real estate market in the world at the time. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so, being a good millennial, I pull out my preaching iPad. So I don't even own a laptop at the time, and I'm 35 pages deep in Google searches trying to find the commercial Airbnb. And I found all kinds of ways to share an office or a one-time event center or a warehouse, but there was no way for me to partner with people in my local community, plant roots, and grow the organization. And so I was in Colorado Springs, which I think per capita has more churches than any other city in the United States. Like it's like the Mecca or whatever. And so I just was seeing all of these churches, and they were always empty. Their parking lots were always empty during the week. I knew there was somebody getting up on Sundays and talking about how they needed money to do X, Y, and Z. And so I was like, there's got to be somebody, there's some way that I can partner with these people, but there was no connected online resource to do that. And so, we had to go the traditional route. I had already gone through two building projects in the process of planting that church with my mentor. So I knew that it was going to be a bunch of realtors that probably didn't want to work with a church plant. It was going to be a ton of B and C class real estate in not great parts of town that were not designed for what we were trying to do. I knew once we found a building, we were going to have to sign this huge personally guaranteed lease that escalated in price over time. And then after all of that, we would have to raise a ton of money to remodel the building to kind of make it look like we wanted to make it look like with a bunch of people that had never remodeled buildings. And I'd already gone through this process a
Yeah.
few times. And then on top of that, I had been sharing space with my mentor for 6 years. So I knew for a fact that I did not need my own building because I had never had one. And we were
Mhm.
running so well. So again, it was like there's got to be some way of doing this. Couldn't find it. We had to go the traditional commercial real estate route. And it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. We got hung up on by realtors. We had realtors laugh at us. We went and saw all these buildings in terrible parts of town that were not designed for churches to be in them. When we finally found a building, we had to sign this huge personally guaranteed lease that escalated in price over time. And then we had to raise a ton of money to remodel the building with a bunch of people that had no idea how to remodel buildings. And after we had gone through all of the realtors, leases, remodels, we were never there. Two services, band practice, youth group, and the rest of the time, this building that was 90% of my budget, and all of my stress was a really expensive storage unit. And so that's when we said, again, there has got to be somebody that's like us that needs 8 hours a week or 4 hours a week in this building. So again, pull out the preaching iPad and go back trying to find, how do people share their buildings? And I just could not find it. And so we took really good pictures of our building and we posted it to the only platform that would allow us to do so at the time, which was Craigslist. And I'm sure as I say that, all the sketchy bells are going off for everybody, and they should, because Craigslist is massively sketchy. And we had all sorts of strange encounters while using their platform. But within 3 months, we had 65% of our overhead covered by people using our facility when we weren't there. And it was a huge pain. We had to figure out how to identify good people from bad people, and how do we have the proper agreements, and like what documentation do they need to have? How do we make sure we get paid? So we had a ton of stuff that we had to figure out, but we were able to do all of that in one quarter. And so, and these guys are on these leases or these license agreements the way that we did it for 2 years. So at the beginning of this plant, within one quarter, I had 65% of my overhead covered for
Wow.
2 years. And I was like, okay, I may not be the smartest guy in the world, but somebody has got to be doing this. And so I knew that the church might be too small of a market to really launch this level of platform. And so we interviewed 1,000 people across the nation in the fitness industry, in the culinary space, medical facilities, charter schools, and we found that 85% of everybody that we spoke to was either already sharing space or they wanted to, but they were freaked out by Craigslist. And so that was when we launched. That was April of 2017 when we first kind of started going. Since that time, we've now grown to have properties in over 30 states. People on our platform have received over $92 million of rental applications since May of 2019 when we started
Wow.
tracking that data. We have a cumulative user base of over 50,000 users, and yeah, just it's been a crazy wild ride. But that's it turns out that a lot of people did have that same need. So
That's incredible. And you touched on it, but tell us what Space Together does.
yeah. So we take the full functionality of a building. So we're not necessarily saying, hey, you have a church. We're going to go in and see, what do you have inside of your building? When do you use it? When do you not use it? What amenities does it have? And rather than saying, this is a church building, we're saying that this building is perfect for gyms, for anybody in the fitness space, for anybody in the culinary space, for anybody that's trying to start a daycare center, for anybody that needs an office, for anybody that needs to do a corporate gathering, presentation, church plant. And that's just for the church industry. And so we basically go in, we find the full functionality of your building, find when it's available, find your amenities, and then we market that functionality to the community around them.
Oh my gosh. First of all, you know that I'm a huge fan and I think this is a genius idea.
Yeah,
One
yeah,
one of the things I want to point out, Justin, just before we get too far into this too, and because ministry solutions, we talk about this a lot. There's a difference really between what I would call a fixed lease and a flexible lease, right? So
yep,
if you've listened to our stuff before, you've heard us talk about childcare and these different uses. And so a fixed lease or a dedicated lease is when a user comes in and they're paying you rent and they essentially, that's their space, right?
yep,
What you're doing, and I think it's so brilliant, is there's tons of businesses out there. You mentioned a few. Someone who owns a dance, I wouldn't want to call it a dance studio,
yeah. Dance studio. That's
dance
correct. Yeah, dance
studio,
studio.
yeah. Um, or I mean, there's a million different examples of this, but they don't. They also don't need space, dedicated space, 24/7. They need it at certain times during the week. They also can't afford all the things that you said, which is getting into a long-term escalating lease and capital improvements and all those things. And so it answers this beautiful question of how do we create, I mean, how do we create space for our community based on their needs when they need
Yep,
it, and people
exactly.
pay for that. That's just as you I think I'm a fan of this idea.
Well,
Justin,
yeah.
let me go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to kind of add to that. So, like when we first started seeing this, we knew that churches had this problem. Like I had been pastoring for 6 years. I had this huge network of churches, and I also had done some like MMA and some combat sport training. So I knew that gyms had the same problem, that they needed this building, they needed it fully outfitted, but there were these huge gaps where it was just sitting empty and nothing was going on. I mean, I knew a gym that rented out a back room to like this dojo instructor as his apartment. You know what I mean? Because they just like never ever used it. And that was really when we dove in and we saw all of these other industries in our first initial survey that were having the same problems, and we knew that they had the same need on the other end of the spectrum. It was kind of when we started seeing for the first time that in the same way that like co-working spaces and shared disk sites changed everything for remote teams and startups and freelancers, there are thousands of teachers and instructors and chefs and pastors that have the exact same need. They just don't need a desk. And so that's really where we tried to step in and provide some of these, fully equipped facilities that sit empty, and these people are paying for them 24 hours a day when they have either the mortgage or the lease on them, and they're not using them the majority of the time. And so that was really kind of the inspiration behind this, was just that there is a huge need out there that's not being met currently.
Man, yeah, it's great. Let me ask you this, Justin. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about just the fact that you and I both have been passionate about this for a very long time, but it was pushing rope up a hill for a while, getting people to
Yeah,
see this opportunity. But man, you and I both have talked about how in the past year, it has taken off. Why do
yeah.
you think that this conversation and this opportunity is so important for the church right now?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple things. Like, one is just the mass adoption of the sharing economy. We share our cars, we share our houses, we share our sporting goods. We share everything. So we need to be sharing our commercial buildings. And I think that some of the fear of, like, oh, you would get into a Lyft or you would get into an Uber in somebody's random car. It's like everybody uses Lyft and everybody uses Uber, and Airbnb. You would, oh my gosh, you would actually stay in somebody's house. It's like, yeah, it's awesome. You know what I mean? And so I think one is just the adoption of the sharing economy has kind of changed everything. Like, people that are entrepreneurs or getting started now, without question, they want to share in the cost and the utility of facilities, and they want to be in more collaborative environments. And that's just kind of how I think things have sort of shifted. The other side of it is, and this could get me in some trouble, but I am a pastor, I am a church planter. I did this for 14 years, planted two churches, absorbed a church, merged with a church, did missions, did all this. I love the church. My life has been serving the gospel. But if I'm being honest, the data around churches has been declining for a long time. But prior to the pandemic, we could just say that wasn't happening, or there's
Sure.
no problem and everything's going to be, back to the way that it should be and everything else. And then I think after the pandemic, there's just been this kind of mass spread of people losing their churches and losing their buildings. And then on top of that, you have just this new era where people are like, hey, so we're coming to your church and we think this is awesome and we're really excited to be partnered with you. What do you guys do with all this space that we're paying for? Is it just for us? And it's actually turning into that our congregants and the people that are coming and being a part of our church, they want to know that we're a bigger resource into our community. And on top of that, I think that it's just kind of how things have sort of shifted and changed. And a lot of the data is more public now, and people are asking more questions. And on top of that, people just see the fact that this building is a tool for us to have impact in our community. So why 80% of the time is it not generating impact and sitting empty?
Yeah, and I think too, I love the sharing economy because we all are. That has become something that's just a part of the way that we live in almost every area of the life. I mean, there's even
Yeah.
now that I could, if I wanted to, put my truck on the market and somebody can come and rent it from me.
Dude, Turo is awesome.
Sure.
Turo.
Yeah,
Turo is freaking amazing. You should definitely use Turo.
yeah, I did, and I got a very nice sports car for less than I would have gotten a compact car from Hertz, and
Yes,
I was very
exactly.
pleased.
100%. Yeah.
I was very pleased.
100%. Yeah.
Well, and here's the interesting thing, and but these ride share companies and others, they take care of the contracts, they cover the insurance, they cover the liability, and kind of the guesswork of they qualify the users. What are some of the things that you're trying to work on? Because those are some of the big objections from the churches. Like, we don't know who's in our space. Are they going to pay us? Some of those things you mentioned. How are you solving that problem for churches?
So what we knew that not only just, from like you got to have this to have customers, but even just from a security standpoint, in essence, on Space Together, you're saying we have this awesome building, it's somewhere near you, and it's available and it has all this stuff in it. So, we don't want to make it just totally accessible for anybody to get to. And so we just really went through the process of the connection. And on Space Together, and on our platform, that connection piece is really what's most beautiful and really more important than anything else. And so we've tailored all of our services around that connection point. So not only are we going to have all the services that make it really easy to host your space and market your space and get really granular when it's available and what it costs and all of those things, but we're also going to go through this security protocols where the renter or the person that's applying to see your space, before they can get a video tour, before they can see a video of what's inside of your building, they have to go through and verify every single thing, their identity, their social accounts, their email, their phone, their payment verification, to make sure they actually have some sort of funds to do what they're saying that they're going to do, and they are who they say they are. They're also going to have to list out the intended use of the space what they plan to do with it and when, before they're ever even going to be able to get a video tour. And you can negotiate all of those things, all of the times, the budget, the intended use of the space, all of that stuff with the tenant and our lead manager before you ever meet this person. And so we've just tried to really gate that process and create this really secure connection so that people that are sharing their spaces on our platform are going to know exactly who it is that they're dealing with, and what the process looks like really before they even make any decisions of letting somebody in their doors.
Brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. Um, so, Justin, you were a pastor, right? And so you mentioned that that is really first and foremost the heart of who you are. And I know from our conversations, you could have plenty of opportunities of taking this concept and serving everyone but the church, but you're using this. Man, what do you see as the big opportunity with shared spaces or activated spaces with more so the church of 2033 than the church of 2013?
Absolutely. And, again, this could get me in some trouble, with the church market. But again, I'm going to say I am a pastor. I've given my entire adult life to pastoring churches. This is like, I are one. I am one, But early on, prior to the pandemic, we started growing by about 1,000 users a month. And it was just like high volume. We were trying to keep up with everybody that was signing on the platform. And the truth of the matter is that prior to the pandemic, we almost went completely away from working with churches. And that was 100% because a lot of the pastors just got really bad reviews. And it wasn't about their building as much as it was they were just having bad interactions with people in the community. And take it for what you will. Maybe it could have been that just people in the community didn't like the pastor and that's all that it ever was. But when you start seeing it in different locations and you're hearing the same stories, you're like, man, there's kind of a problem here. And it almost kind of always felt like the pastors seemed like they were doing a favor to these people by letting them in the building, but these people were paying thousands of dollars to have the access that they did. And so there wasn't this favor that they were doing. And so we almost kind of tailored all of our marketing efforts and a lot of the things that we were doing away from working with the church, not because I didn't love the church, not because they weren't, the best possible person to do this with, but because we just started having some bad interactions and we didn't know how to, how do you solve that? You start sending emails out saying like, hey guys, please be nicer. You're making us look bad. Like what do you do? You know what I mean? And so, when the pandemic, really started happening, the majority of our users couldn't get into their buildings, much less share them with anybody else. And so we really started trying to say, if we were going to focus on one group of people, who would that be? And at the end of the day, I always got a lot of flack amongst my team because I was a pastor and I had this super soft spot for the church and I wanted the church. So I had to go in and really prove that without question, the church was the best market for us to focus on in the midst of every other vertical. And the thing is that if you're looking at it from a formula of, availability and diversification of use, there is no other industry that comes close to the church. We are always directly in the center of usually a prime location in town. 35% of our churches have full gymnasiums. 65% of them have commercial kitchens. They all have fully up to code childcare facilities. They all have offices and they all have auditoriums that sit empty the majority of the time. And that's not even talking about the schools that we've built or the parking lots that we have or the huge fields that we have around our facilities. And, I was listening to kind of, close that up. I was listening to an interview with Jeff Bezos, and he was talking about how he was loving that, all these people were building these companies that were going to serve the needs for the next 10 years and 15 years and things that were coming on down the line. And he said, well, I love innovation and I love that. The truth is that at Amazon, we focus on the things that we know people are going to want for the next 10 years and the next 50 years. And he said, I know that people are always going to want more products. They're going to want more selection. They're going to want to pay less and they're going to want to have a more variety and get their things quicker. They're going to want it quicker or faster delivered. So if I focus on having more products, keeping my prices as low as possible and getting it to them as fast as I possibly can and letting those be our metrics, then we will always have a compelling company. And that being said, it's the exact same thing for commercial real estate. People are always going to want more flexibility in what they're doing. They're always going to want more access and they're going to want to pay the most competitive pricing. And the truth is, man, the church has all of that right now. You already have what your community is looking for right now. For the next 10 years, people are still going to want more access to better properties that already have their amenities for a better price. That's never going to change. So if the church becomes the best at doing that right now, if we get better at utilizing our facilities into our communities, if we do that now, we're going to be way ahead of the game in 2033. And you can just look at the scale of the sharing economy. I mean, my gosh, look at all the different companies that have been put out of business by these companies that are just allowing people to share their assets. So I would say without question, man, the sharing economy is not going to stop. It's not going to go anywhere. And we can either kind of decide that we're going to become an advocate in our community for everybody that's trying to start or sustain their organization, or we're going to watch other industries do that and continue to grow and scale. And we won't be the ones providing that impact, nor will we be receiving the non-traditional revenue streams.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a combination of two things. We live in a sharing economy for sure, but we also live in a very asynchronous, on demand economy. People don't
Absolutely.
want to pay for something if they're not using it. I want to find what I'm looking for when I need it. And it's really the combination because space has always been a challenge for a lot of businesses. It's always one of the biggest expenses. And again, a ballet school is doing classes from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., but they're paying rent from 10 p.m. to 8 p.m. the next
You're
or
absolutely
5
right.
p.m. the next day,
You're absolutely
every
right.
day. Right. And
Every day.
so we have that space. We're paying for that space. And there are a lot of people who would love to know that they can have that space on demand for when they need it and only pay for how much they need it. And I just think that is brilliant. I mean, so Justin, going back, because we've talked a lot on the dedicated lease side, from what are some of the success stories? I mean, I want to take this two ways. So you and I have talked about one of the beautiful things about the platform, right, is that it's basically marketing a church to the community. A lot of those people may not come on Sunday morning at 9 a.m., but they're going to come and use the facility on Wednesday at 4 p.m.
Yep.
So there's a missional aspect to this, and there's a monetary aspect of this, and having buildings that fund ministry, not just ministries that fund buildings. I'd love to hear just a few of your success stories and things where you've seen where this concept has really impacted a church, both missionally and monetarily.
First of all, people on the platform received over $92 million in rental applications with an over 30% acceptance rate. So, I mean, that's, just in the zoom out, people have received millions of dollars through sharing their space, just in Space Together generally. I think one of my absolute favorite stories is about a Romanian congregation in Colorado Springs, and they were actually renting from our church. And so I have another one that I'll tell, or a couple others. But this is without question my favorite. And so it was a group of Romanian. So there was this pretty big Romanian community in Colorado Springs. And so they were all wanting to have their traditional services and do their thing, but they were having a hard time, finding an actual building to do that in, and they didn't want to go sign a lease and do all of this just for this community to get together. So they were meeting in houses, but their group got too big to do that, and they had a pastor, they had all these things, and it was one of the coolest things I ever saw. So they would go into the sanctuary and they would do like this little worship kind of service and sing together, and then we had this big 25-foot table out in our cafe. And every single service, they would create this feast, like this massive feast. And that's what they did for their service. And so they would go in and sing, and then they would come in and just eat together, this like beautiful Romanian feast. And, they rented from us for about 2 years. And I think maybe at about a year and a half or so, they came up to me and they said, "Hey, it was the pastor. He said, "Hey, I want you to know that we would not have been able to serve this entire community in this city if you would not have made your building available." And he's like, "I just want you to know this has been a 100% huge story for us. This has been a godsend. Also, it's been really great that you've accepted me." And I'm like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, a lot of pastors had a problem with me being both pastor and bounty hunter." And I was like, first of all, I didn't know you were a bounty hunter. That's awesome. But yeah, so that's one of my favorite stories. We also had one of my employees' mothers runs a missionary organization that takes trips to Israel, and she was out in Wyoming somewhere at this random church conference that she was attending. And the pastor, whoever was putting together the conference, said, "Is there anybody here that has just an outstanding, overwhelming testimony of the faithfulness of God that they would like to come up and testify about?" And so this lady walks up there, and still don't know where this conference was held, still don't know any of the details. We finally know who the person is. But she gets up and she's just like, "We had been looking for a building for 2 years and we couldn't find one that matched what we needed. We couldn't do it. And then one day the Lord told me to go to this site called SpaceTogether." And so I go to SpaceTogether, and we find that there was a lady in our city that was sharing her building. And so they come in and they start renting from this lady. They start doing their services. The church that they started matching with was a church that had gotten a lot older. They only had like 20 or 30 people coming. And this group was like a young, emerging church that was really making things happen. And the older church had really been trying to figure out a way of like, how do we kind of let this down easy? Like, we're really tired. We don't have a pastor anymore. And, we just have this building that's a great asset. So how do we make this transition? And so they ended up selling their building to this couple, and then they took it over as their building. They got it on for like pennies on the dollar, and then they continued to use Space Together to impact the community around them, which I thought was, I mean, how does that happen? Like, we had no part of that. One of my employees' moms was just at the conference, and that's how we found out about it. We wouldn't even have known that any of that happened. And then we also had a church out in Arizona, super cool group of like younger guys, but they've got this church like 500 people, and they're just all kind of crazy young folks making the thing happen. And so they started using our platform, and within like the first couple months, they had like a ton of money coming in from renting out their building when they weren't doing it, and they were like, dude, like we could make even more money and have more impact if we just didn't meet on Sundays. So they ended up changing their entire system to where they were meeting on like Friday nights, and then they just started renting out their church to different people on Sundays. And they were like, dude, we're making more money, having more impact, sharing our building than we were just having services. So,
wow, that is incredible. Well, and we touched on this too, right? But the platform is just marketing for people to come on the site, and again, to people who may not come on Sunday morning. That's the other
yeah,
beautiful thing. It gives you a chance to interact with people that you may otherwise never ever get a chance to interact with. So it's just it's just very, very cool. Um, I mean, this is a newer concept, Justin, and I think you and I are both obviously champions of this. But what's some advice that you give to churches who are looking at doing this? I mean, what do you see sometimes gets in the way of a church being able to successfully activate their space for the community's use?
absolutely. So I would say three things. And we have a training that we offer. It's $500. It's hyper collaborative, where we just teach people how to share space and like best practices, how you can go through and do all these things. But the first thing that we start off, go ahead.
I was going to say is one of those. Don't be mean to the people who come
Yeah.
on your campus. I hope you
Yeah.
address that. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah, definitely. And it's really cool because when we do the training, we do it over Zoom. We give them like a digital copy, but then there's people from all different industries that are on it. So it's not just pastors, people that have dance studios and gyms and kitchens, they all join as well. And so we're all just talking about how to share our spaces. And so it ends up being a really cool collaborative thing. Um, but the first thing that we always do is we start off and we say, if you are sharing your building, you're doing it for one of two reasons. You're either doing it for impact or you're doing it for cash. Either way, whatever, wherever you find yourself on that spectrum, you need to create infrastructure that supports your mission. And so I think that a lot of people just kind of jump into this. I had a conversation with the president of the Presbyterian Foundation, and he said that of the churches that had tried to share their space in his organization, they had an over 67% default rate. And I know exactly why that was, because the concept of, hey, let's just open our doors in our community and have people start renting the building is a really good, seemingly simple idea. And it is, but there is a ton of infrastructure that goes into making this a safe and scalable operation. You're essentially starting another business or organization inside of your business. And so the first couple of things that we say is, number one, if you're signing subleases with people, do not do that. Stop. I mean, whoever you have out there right now that you're doing, that's great. But if you sign a sublease with somebody, there's a reason why a lot of owners do not like their tenants to sign these subleases. And it's not just that people are going to have access to their building that they didn't okay. That's not really the main thing. A lot of commercial real estate owners don't care. What they do care about, though, is whenever you sign that sublease, you're giving legal possession of the building to that tenant. They have the building with the same rights that you do. It is their building the same way that you just signed a lease.
Yep. And as a commercial real estate guy, I can say that's 100% true. And often subleases conflict with the lease that or the underlying lease that is between the operator and the owner. And then now you have two contracts that are in conflict with each other, and the resolution of that can be very
exactly
tricky.
And if somebody does something wrong or something that you don't want them in your building anymore, you have to go through a formal eviction process.
That's great.
A formal eviction process. So I don't know if this is the same everywhere else, but I know in Colorado, if somebody had a sublease and you had to evict them, And let's say that they signed an agreement to rent out one office for, 4 hours on Monday to have their client meetings. And the first Monday they go in and do a goat sacrifice. And you're like, that is not what you said you were going to be doing. You can't, you're not going to just do this every Monday now. What are you guys doing in there? Right. You would have to go to the sheriff's office and get them to come and put an eviction notice on your front door and on the door that they had access to, and it has to stay there for some length of time. I think it's like 30 or 60 days, right? And then on top of that, you still have to get them out of the building. It's not like the police officer is going to come in with a gun, like, get out. That's not how it works. Like, you still have to remove access and do all these different things. And you have to have an eviction notice on your door for some length of time while you're operating your building, while you're running your organization. It's not a good thing to do when you're sharing your space. So the first thing we tell people, don't do subleases. We have a license agreement that we auto generate on our platform that gives somebody legal permission based on a lot of other criteria. It's a completely different process. Somebody breaks those rules, they are now trespassing and no longer have a partnership with you to be in the building, which is a completely different
Yeah.
circumstance.
It's the difference between an operating agreement and a lease agreement.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly. 100%. So that would be the first thing that I would say. Find out why you're really doing it. Where do you find yourself on the spectrum of both impact and cash? Secondly, do not sign any sort of sublease with anybody. Just don't do it. Just save yourself the headache. It's not like it always goes wrong. I'm sure the majority of the time you'd be fine, but just save yourself the headache there. The other thing is, you would be shocked at the amount of people that are trying to rent their building with their community with no security systems or surveillance. And so we tell people, if you are going to begin sharing your space with your community, that is a non-negotiable thing. You must have a surveillance system, and you must have some sort of security system where you can manage access, and you can determine who actually entered the building by the code that they put in. So just a couple little things there. I could probably go on for 6 days talking
No,
about all the different things, but
no. I mean, the underlying thing that I hear when you talk about this, I think it's very important, is that there's a huge potential impact from activating the space and doing things, but there are nuances to this that require some level of experience and expertise and knowledge, and so you don't step on landmines. And I can speak to that from the dedicated lease side. We're having to negotiate with big operators all the time on things that we know down the road could negatively impact the church. And I know for you, you're bringing up just a few of the many things that could happen in that. And so it's good to have people around the table who know that space, how to navigate it, so that you can take advantage of the opportunities, not be distracted from the ministry, but also maximize the opportunity. So I think that's
absolutely.
I think that's really huge. Where do you see this going over the next 5 to 10 years? What if you had your way? What does the church of the future look like to you when it comes to how buildings are used and how we're looking at buildings as tools for ministry?
Man, I have a similar testimony to you, Nathan. Neither one of us grew up, in the Sunday school, and we had a lot of different things, and so I can speak just from my family and my experience that the gospel changed my life in so many different ways, and the gospel of love, and just having people that were willing to take a risk on a kid that had no idea what he was doing and did not know what I was getting into, and all these people that just came alongside me and spoke to me and nourished me and really turned me into the man that I am today. And so if I were giving a crystal ball, I would say that I would love to know that the majority of our churches have opened up their doors not only to have services where we can impact people in that way, but that we've also opened up our doors so that the business owners and the nonprofits that are also equally trying to impact their world and equally trying to impact their community can have that same level of support from people in the church that care about the people in their community. And so seeing that, people again have activated their spaces, not just so they can hold Sunday morning services as usual, but they can become this true epicenter for like entrepreneurship and nonprofit incubation and make things actually happen in our community by having this little community hub. One of our heroes right now is Greg Lindsay, and
Yeah,
he's just
go
doing
Greg.
this, man. I love Greg so much, and he's from Colorado Springs where I was at, and if you're hanging out with Greg or Greg's listening to this, man, I could not be more excited to have a guy that has this mega church, this huge church in our community, and he's saying, man, we just spent $5 million on this building. Why is it sitting empty all the time?
Yeah.
And so again, that would be my dream, man, to just know that the church is known more than just for our services.
Yeah, and again, you and I just talked about this so much, man. But what it would look like for our buildings to be one of the most relevant
Yeah, man.
places in our communities, and that we were known for what we're for, that we're for our people, that we're providing for those people in our communities, and not just trying to market them to get them to do or come to a service on 9/11. And what's so counterintuitive about this and all the data and all the things that we study is the less we focus on that latter thing and the more we focus on reading people where they are, the more we get them to come to our buildings at
Yep.
9 and at 11. And so it's really cool. Justin, thank you so much, man. I know you're busy growing SpaceTogether right now, and you have a lot going on. But I'm so excited about what you're doing. I think you're going to have a huge, huge, huge impact on the church, and again, just helping churches without having to go spend millions and millions of dollars, activate the spaces that they have today, both for community impact, but also to monetize their buildings and have more money to do ministry. So I appreciate the work you're doing, man.
Man, absolutely. Nathan, I love you, man. I'm so thankful that we get to do some of this together, man. It's so good talking with you, and I appreciate the opportunity for sure, man. Thank you.
All right. And by the way, guys, if you have any questions, I know Justin would be more than willing to jump on a quick call with you to answer them, and we'll provide some information. But thank you for being here today, and we will look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Thanks.
Thanks.